Welcome to a special edition of the Non-Obvious Insights Show as part of the AMA Non-Obvious Summit, and I am so excited to have my good friend Tom Fishburne, also known as, more widely known as, Marketoonist. Tom, how are you?
Thank you. Great. It's so great to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I know that many people who are watching this probably are familiar with your work. I mean, you've been doing cartoons that really dig into the heart of the silliness, sometimes stupidity, sometimes cleverness of marketing and branding, and really expose how we could be better. And that's what I love about your work. And so what I wanted to talk to you about, and the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, was just your journey to get to this place. I mean, you used to work in a corporate role, in a corporate marketing role, and then you discovered this talent and became Marketoonist. So take us into that journey and how that worked for you.
Yeah, it's kind of serendipitous. It's not the typical career journey from Harvard Business School, but that's where it started. I was in a business school environment and started drawing cartoons for the student paper about some of what I was experiencing as a student, and then went to work at General Mills in marketing. Realized that there's similar types of inside jokes, and I didn't have a student paper anymore, so I started a simple email newsletter, originally just for my friends who sat around me. And then it started to grow. And I realized that many of the things that I was going through as a marketer were things that everybody was going through as a marketer. And it followed along in my kind of corporate career path as I went from General Mills to Nestle. And then I joined a small company, Method. I was there for 5 years, had a chance to go to Europe with them. And the cartoons just kept growing. And eventually I started to think maybe there could be something in the cartoons that could be bigger than just a hobby. And as I started to get commissioned to do custom types of projects, I started to think, if I come at cartooning as a marketer, could I create kind of a small agency that uses cartoons as a communication medium and grow from there? And so 10 years ago this month, I left my role at Method and started doing this full time with my wife, and I collaborate with a few other cartoonists, and we basically help companies tell business stories using cartoons and do a lot of internal culture change types of projects too.
Well, and one of the things that I think is so fascinating about the cartoons that you do is they really reflect on this deep insight of right now, which you find in a lot of them, because the world's dramatically changed. And as it's changed, the things that you write about and how you talk about this is so interesting, because people will read this and say, that's so true. And I wonder how much you get that reaction, and how do you come to that insight that then translates into the cartoon?
I love that reaction. I love when people will email me and say, were you spying on me in my conference room? Because it shows that I've tapped into something that is kind of universal, at least within the world of marketing. It started as my own personal diary, really. So these were things I was grappling with, and that ultimately is what started to spread and grow. So my first compass is sort of my own. What am I experiencing? What am I going through? Trying to be honest with myself about the process. And this year in particular has been a time when it's even more universal. More of us are going through the very similar types of shared experiences on certain things. And so I found that the more I can be truthful to what I'm experiencing, the more relevant it is to others. And I feel like then that allows us to talk about it. Because I feel like sometimes I certainly felt in certain roles, I'm the only one who feels this way. I'm the admissions mistake in business school. I'm the hiring mistake in corporate. Like maybe it's just me. And then I found over time that, when you could start with a cartoon and laughter, it would diffuse the situation, and people could say, actually, I'm feeling the same thing. And so that was sort of an eye opener for me about the potential of cartoons, particularly in this sort of niche world, that if you can find the right inside jokes that we all share, we can talk about them.
Yeah, and it is really some of those inside jokes. I mean, when you see something like this omni-channel customer engagement, you're like, oh man, I've had a meeting about that, right? Like I know that from just being in that meeting. I mean, when something is unhealthy but natural, and like, what does natural mean? I remember like this cartoon in particular, it really took me back to this meeting that I remember being in back when I was in the agency, in my agency days, where we had a 90-minute meeting about whether we could put the word healthy or healthful on a package, because apparently they mean entirely different things according to like FDA rules and all those things. And I think that part of what makes these cartoons work is that we all have these experiences as marketers where we've been in that room and we've thought that, but we didn't necessarily have a way of articulating it. And then we read this cartoon, we're like, oh, that's it. Like that's where I was. That was my thought.
It's the emperor has no clothes, and marketing. I think a lot of. I mean, that's everywhere. But I think in marketing, we particularly that happens frequently in marketing. There's no shortage of material.
That's very true. And I'm curious, maybe if you could just take us into, you have a really interesting process for how you develop the ideas for cartoons, how you're always looking for kind of source material, and just dig into that process, because I think that it's the same process that anyone who is really trying to come up with a creative insight, which is at the heart of really great marketing and branding all the time, right? I mean, we need great creative insights in order to be able to differentiate ourselves and tell a story and do all the things that we want to do as marketers. So take us inside the process for how you do that.
Sure. When I was just drawing one cartoon a week on top of my day job, I could sort of wait for the eureka moments. I would hear something in a meeting. I'd always have a paper and a pen. I'd jot it down. But now that I do this professionally, my output has to be so much higher. I have to be much more process driven about it. And so I find it really useful to set up certain times of day throughout the week where I'm focused on deep thinking without distractions, and then allow the process to unfold as I go. And here there's sort of a rough sketch to a final. But for me, it even starts earlier than that, where I'm playing with stimulus, a pain point, something that I'm sort of that I feel like could turn into something. I sort of describe it as a stub of an idea, like a Wikipedia stub. And I've over time developed sort of a little bit of an instinct around there's something here as an idea. And then I've tried to build in enough time in my process to let that idea unfold. A lot of the process for me is sort of unconscious. So I dedicate the first 2 hours of every day purely for blue sky creative thinking. I have a lot of rituals. I listen to the same album over and over on a loop. I have sort of this system. I put my phone on airplane
What
mode.
album is it, by the way? I'm curious.
It's a 1959 Miles Davis album called Kind of Blue. For some reason, that one just started to speak to me. I never get tired of it. The moment I hear the first few bars, it gets me in the zone. And it works really well if I'm on an airplane, for instance, and I'm not in my studio. I can put on the headphones and it gets me in that space. So I find that 2 hour window is the most valuable of my day. I have to let myself really go. And then I try to separate my creative mind from my critical mind. So the morning is creative, and then later on, I shift into more of an editor sort of mindset where I'll look at what I've come up with and then try to winnow it down to something that works.
And talk a little bit about this term that we spend a lot of time focused on, at least in the marketing and business world, which is collaboration. And a lot of what you described feels quite solitary in how you do things. And so I wonder, like, what role does collaboration play in what you do? And is it as important as we often hear it is? Or do we need more solo time?
It is important, but it's sometimes misunderstood. And I do think we need more solo time. The idea of the brainstorm, for instance, I remember in one corporate environment where I worked in, the manager would say, we need a brainstorm, and he'd get everybody into a room, and he'd sit there and he said, now it's time for your lips to start moving. And there wasn't a chance to really reflect on what we were trying to come up with. And I found over time, the best collaborations were when we all had time for our individual deep thinking solo creativity, and then we would come together and we would share those ideas and riff off things. I had a chance to sit in on a TV writers' room a couple of years ago, and that's the model that they took. All these really creative, smart writers would come together in a room. They talk about the challenge, and they go away to their separate corners. They'd all write for an hour, then they'd come back in and pitch each other ideas, and then they'd spitball things and build on it. And that collaborative spitballing and build on is really important. But if you're just forcing that before you've had the solo time, in my experience, the ideas are as strong as they could be otherwise. And so my cartooning process is much more solitary, but on many of the projects that I work on, I am collaborating with other cartoonists. And it's often a case where we're all working separately, then we come together, share ideas, and try to make the ideas stronger.
Yeah, and you mentioned collaborating on other projects, and I think one of the things that we have had in the past, you and I, a conversation about, and we just did on our, the weekly episode of the Non-Obvious Insight Show, where we dig further into a lot of these things, and we had kind of a chance to talk about some of those things. I asked you about the business model behind some of the things that you do, and in particular, this idea that you're constantly creating content, you're putting it out there. The downside of that, the fact that you put it out there for free, the downside is that it's quite easy to just take and use without paying for it. And you have a very easy licensing system on your site, and people can and should pay for usage of the images. And one of the things I'm just curious about as a marketing challenge is, how do you encourage people to do that in a culture that perhaps has gotten a little bit too soft and built the wrong expectations about whether they even need to pay for content at all, ever?
I tend to, in my model, prioritize getting my work out into the world, and ultimately that people see that and they want to work together on a bigger project. So I kind of focus on the bigger projects as my priority. And then within the licensing, I found that there's a benefit to working in corporate environments where there are a number of people who do want to do the right thing. Licensing a cartoon for presentations for a big event, licensing a cartoon to, put out as part of their outward marketing, to put in their thought leadership, or those types of use cases. Very often, they do want to do the right thing. They're more sensitive to it, probably helped by the fact that there are others out there who will enforce it much more rapidly. If they see a big company using a piece of photography that they haven't licensed, they're used to having companies come after them. I don't come after anybody because I try to do it on the honor code, and I feel grateful. I really see creating these cartoons as a privilege, and the relationship that I have with my audience as a privilege. And so I really focus on that relationship with the audience, wanting to give them great material, and then kind of have the honor code that they want to use it for business purposes. They'll contact me to license. And I find over time that audience will often do some policing on their own, only in the sense that if they're in a big event and they see somebody sharing one of my cartoons, they're like, oh, this is so cool, someone's using your cartoon. And then I see it. And then the only examples I go after are when somebody takes a cartoon and strips my name out of it, or changes the caption to say something I didn't say, or in some egregious examples, which I've mentioned before, they'll actually trace over my cartoon to make it look like it's slightly different, and then translate it or put it in something else. Those examples drive me crazy, and it's usually my own audience that says, that doesn't look like you've allowed that.
Yeah, and then that's one of the amazing things of having this kind of vast pool of readers out there. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you've enjoyed some of the cartoons that we've shared on the show and some of the things that Tom's been talking about, definitely go to Marketoonist.com and subscribe to his weekly newsletter, where you'll get a new cartoon in your inbox every week, which is always good. I've been on the list for a long time, and I always enjoy it. Pick up a copy of his book where he talks about this, and also make sure that you look at licensing the stuff that you do use, if you do use it, because we all have to support one another, and that's super, super important. So, I'd like to end, Tom, maybe by taking your mind, which is trained to observe the realities of marketing and branding and business, and maybe turn the lens towards what you're anticipating for the future. I mean, our theme here for the event is the future of marketing. And I wonder if you could put on that hat, if it is a hat, around that, or maybe that crystal ball, or whatever the cliche is of thinking about the future that you prefer, and maybe spotlight what you're going to be looking for and what you expect to see, and maybe what will it take for marketers and brand people to be successful in the future.
I think that there are a few things that I've seen in the past that I expect to continue, and that'll be good for me as a cartoonist because I can make fun of some of those, but it's also a chance to learn from that. And probably the biggest thing is the shiny new object syndrome that comes along. There's always something shiny and new, particularly technology driven, and very often as marketers, we can sort of jump on the bandwagon really quickly. I drew a cartoon once of a bunch of dogs around a conference table, and one saying, we need to stay focused on our marketing objectives and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, squirrel, and then all the dogs look out the window at the squirrel. So that's something I see continuing, and I feel like there's an opportunity, as marketers, to take a step back and really think more about the businesses ultimately that we're working on, and how whatever comes up in the future can help us reach those goals, rather than be shiny object syndrome focused. Instead, be focused on the consumer, the customer, the people we're trying to reach, and their moments that matter in their journey. So that shift is one that's happening. And I think within the role of marketing, the other thing I think that's going to be much more important is to think much more like general managers. I come out of a brand management environment where, part of my role was to have a P&L. It wasn't just outbound marketing communication. And that P&L mindset, I think, is going to be more and more important for all marketers to adopt to some degree, to think like business people, because we're really positioned well to drive the future of business, but we need to really understand all levers within the business and not just the marketing communication levers to make full impacts. Ultimately, marketing, as I heard described as marketing, is too important to be left to the marketing department. I think that it's, for us as marketers, we need to really ultimately touch everything across the whole business.
Well, that is an excellent place to end this segment. I just want to say thank you for producing this amazing cartoon every week, for sharing your insights, for going behind the scenes, for the process of this. I think it's been a great chance to learn from some of the things that you do. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.